Shadow Slave. By Guiltythree. Chapter 1271, The Krill. The battle between the Azure Serpent and the Krill swarm did not last long, but it was the most terrifying event Sunny had seen since entering the third nightmare. The great beast completely lost its mind as it fought the legion of vile abominations. Stirred by its fury, the water seethed and roiled, sometimes exploding into colossal fountains of scarlet foam, sometimes rising in titanic waves. The magnitude of these undulations was so severe that the whole island rocked and swayed like a ship caught in the middle of a world-ending storm. The cacophony of wrathful roars and thunderous sonic booms merged into a deafening litany, to the point that both Sunny and Nephi's were forced to plug their ears. Thousands of attacking Krill were destroyed. But the swarm did not seem diminished at all. Instead, no matter how furiously the Azure Serpent fought, more and more abominations were lunging at it, their thin legs moving in gluttonous anticipation. At first, the water armor the Leviathan had created protected its prodigious body, but eventually it failed. One Krill struggled past the repelling current of the whirlpool, then two, then 100. Their teeth scraped powerlessly against the impenetrable azure scales. However, after suffering through 3 dire battles with the dark butterfly, the Azure Serpent was battered and littered with wounds. Its body had already been covered by countless scars before, and now, there were numerous new ones. Some scales were broken, some cracked, and some were missing entirely. It was only a matter of time before one of the Krill managed to draw blood. Then 2, then 100. Even though their size was minuscule in comparison to the great river serpent, they were corrupted abominations nevertheless, and their painful bites added up. The pain did not slow the Azure Serpent down, though. Instead, it became even more enraged, even more deranged, even more frenzied. The battle, which had already been frightening to look at, suddenly exploded in intensity, reaching a realm that went beyond fear. Standing on the swaying shell of the black turtle, Sunny and Nephi's watched the boiling river with pale faces. Before Sunny knew what was happening, he found himself holding Neph's hand. He did not know which one of them grasped the other's hand first, but felt that this simple touch was his only lifeline in a world that had lost all reason. He also did not know how much time had passed. All Sunny knew was that the battle was changing. The Azure Serpent did not manage to destroy the Krill swarm. However, the swarm had also failed to consume the serpent. But their goal was not the mad Leviathan, in the first place. The serpent was rampaging in the waters infested by the Krill, but the swarm was simply too vast. Thousands of abominations at its edges simply rushed past the great beast and continued toward the carcass of the black turtle, their translucent bodies turning crimson as they dove into the cloudy red water. Noticing that, the Azure Serpent let out an infuriated roar, but there was little it could do. The main mass of the swarm surrounded it like a cage, and no matter how forcefully it slammed into its shifting barrier, it couldn't break free. Suddenly, Sunny felt a purifying warmth enter his body and soul. Looking down, he saw a soft glow rising from his skin, and glanced at Nephi's with a silent question. Her lips seemed dry. Bow. I think you should summon your bow. He lingered for a moment, and then his eyes glinted darkly. Sparks of light ignited around his hand and formed into a black bow with a scarlet string. Then, an arrow that was like a bolt of lightning appeared out of nothing. Drawing Morgan's warbow, Sunny aimed at the seething mass of the approaching Krill, and let the strike of thunder loose. The lightning flashed toward the crimson water and exploded, sending arcs of electricity flying across the surface of the river. The monstrous Krill were about the length of Sunny's arm, with carapaces so thin that they appeared transparent. Still, they were corrupted beasts, so their shells were tough enough to resist a direct hit from a railgun, and their teeth were sharp enough to tear through armored MWPs as if they were made from paper. But Sunny and his bow were augmented both by the shadows and the soul flame, granting his arrow tremendous power. Which was why he soon heard a familiar voice whispering into his ear, "You have slain a corrupted beast, River Locust. Your shadow grows stronger. You have slain a corrupted beast, River Locust. Your shadow grows stronger. You have slain a corrupted beast, River Locust. Your shadow grows stronger." Without stopping to listen to the spell, Sunny sensed a flood of shadow fragments pouring into his soul and drew the string of the warbow again. He did not hope to stop the advance of the Krill swarm, and neither did he hope to help the Azure Serpent prevail. Even if Sunny killed 100 abominations, he wouldn't be putting a tiny dent in the swarm. Rather, what he was doing was pure opportunism. Nephi's needed to burn the enemy with her flames or consume the soul shard like a normal awakened to receive fragments, but Sunny just needed a kill. So, he could just as well use the opportunity to strengthen himself. Sunny managed to fire off a few soul arrows and the strike of thunder once more before the Krill reached the black turtle, reaping a rich harvest of lives. Then, however, it became too dangerous to remain near the edge of the island. Even though the revolting creatures could not crawl out of the water, they showed themselves capable of jumping out of it with enough force to propel their translucent bodies through the air. After one of the Krill landed a mere dozen or so meters away from them and scurried forward before being pierced by a black arrow, Sunny and Nephi's decided to retreat. Below them, thousands of corrupted beasts were fruitlessly trying to bite into the impregnable black scales of the dead behemoth. Some, however, were already swimming into the gaping wound under its flipper. Further away, the azure serpent finally managed to break the cage of the greatly diminished swarm and shot through the water in pursuit. It looked terribly mangled, bleeding from 1,000 tiny bites. Some of the Krill even seemed to have burrowed into the open wounds, just like the serpent itself had burrowed into the body of the black turtle before. Despite that, the great beast seemed just as murderous and consumed by madness as ever. The old snake did it. It actually won. Even though many Krill had managed to reach the carcass and swim inside, the swarm was undeniably broken. The azure serpent, and the 2 humans it was hunting, were going to live another day. Chapter 1272, Paradise Lost. That night, the island was quaking without pause. Sunny and Nephi's hid in their fissure, not daring to close their eyes. Even though a mass of impregnable black rock separated them from the flesh of the black turtle, it was unnerving to know that thousands of corrupted beasts were currently slithering somewhere below them, shredding the meat of the great monster with their terrible glass-like teeth. The azure serpent was also there, hunting down the invaders. Although they couldn't hear its roars, the violent vibrations spreading through the island told them what was going on. Sunny looked away from the shimmering runes, somewhat startled at how easily he had earned a large amount of shadow fragments. After another violent tremor had shaken the island, he finally closed his eyes. However, it was not to sleep. Instead, Sunny tried to imagine. Tried to convince himself that he was the azure serpent. He was crawling through the grotesque tunnel of bleeding flesh, which he himself had created to kill the hateful carapace monster, furiously hunting the vile creatures who dared to steal his trophy. His long, mighty body was burning from pain, but Sunny did not care. All he cared about was slaughter, blood, and retribution. Noticing a tiny worm gnawing on the wall of the tunnel, he let out a terrifying growl and shot forward, destroying the vermin and tearing a large chunk of meat out of the wall with his powerful jaws. But, behind it, more vermin were revealed, stolen meat digesting in their transparent stomachs. With madness painting the cloudy world red, Sunny roared and slammed into them with obliterating fury. Is this the feeling? Am I on the right path? Opening his eyes, he stared into the darkness with an absent expression. Then, he looked at Nephi's. Some time later, Sunny said, I feel like our chances of making it off this island alive are dwindling. She remained silent for a while. So what if they are? White flames ignited in her eyes, illuminating them with a pale radiance. Has it been any different before? Hearing that, Sunny chuckled. True. We never had it easy. He studied her face, then turned to look at the sin of solace and sighed. Still, I hope that this nightmare will be better than my second one. Oh, it's not much of a competition. I must have died 1,000 times there. Even though I only remember a handful of those deaths, the third nightmare surely can't turn out any worse than that. Nephi's turned and looked at him, then smiled faintly. Of course. In the worst case, we'll just die once. That's nothing, right? As the dark island shook and quaked around them, Sunny grinned. Dying once? Child's play. Gods, anyone can do it. You're right, I was worried about nothing. As they laughed quietly, the sin of solace smiled, too. His smile was bright and full of sinister amusement. The next day after the attack of the Krill swarm, the butterfly descended from the skies again. And 2 days after that, another flying abomination appeared silently in the darkness of the night. Neither Sunny nor Nephi saw it, but in the morning, the surface of the island was awash with black, fetid blood. It seemed that it was the butterfly that had battled the late contender this time, ripping it to shreds before it had the chance to approach the remains of the black turtle. It must have taken an injury in that battle, because the Azure Serpent received more days than usual to recover from its dire wounds. Then, as they drifted further downstream, a second Krill swarm attacked, this one even larger than the first. The battle between the mad Leviathan and the vast river locust swarm lasted for an entire day, and its result was pretty much the same. Thousands of translucent abominations slithered into the carcass of the black turtle, and the battered serpent followed to hunt them down. However, what met it inside was another great beast, a vile creature made of numerous tentacles and spongy pale flesh, that had snuck to feast on the insides of the turtle while the river serpent had been fighting the krill. Sunny and Nephi's knew how it looked because the Azure Serpent brought its revolting body outside and rose high above the water before swallowing the corpse whole. That was how they learned why a powerful earthquake had suddenly thrown the world into spasms and convulsions before. On that day, to their horror, they discovered a deep crack snaking its way through the surface of the black turtle's shell. It was not too large, but the fact that the stone carapace of the dead monster had been broken from the inside was indescribably concerning. Next morning, Nephi's went to the edge of the island instead of practicing with Sunny, as they usually did, and spent several hours staring at the water. Then, she brought back disturbing news. The carcass of the black turtle was higher than it had been before. The parts of it that had been hidden underwater were now dry and exposed. This meant that a considerable amount of the dead behemoth's flesh had already been devoured by the Azure Serpent, the marauding krill, and the pale thief, thus reducing its weight and increasing its buoyancy. It was also the reason why the swaying and the shaking of the island had grown much more severe lately. The carapace of the black turtle was deteriorating and cracking under the strain of harrowing battles raging around and inside of it, and at the same time, it was being gradually hollowed out by the nightmare creatures of the great river. Their titanic shelter was slowly coming undone under them. Worse yet, in the coming days, the number of abominations arriving to feast on the corpse of the titanic monster only increased. There were more krill, more dwellers of the deep, and more winged horrors being lured to it by the scent of blood. It was a carnival of horror. The Azure Serpent and the Dark Butterfly were like champions among them, slaying all invaders and occasionally clashing with each other. But that only made the situation worse. Now, the dreadful inhabitants of the great river were attracted not only by the blood of the black turtle, but also by the blood of unfortunate abominations that had been slain in their attempt to feast on the turtle's meat. This can't go on much longer. It just can't. Both Sunny and Nephi's knew that doom was swiftly approaching. However, there was nothing they could do. No matter how much they hoped and how diligently they watched the horizon, there was no sign of anything that could save them. There was no land and no ships anywhere in sight. There was not even a piece of flotsam drifting on the waves. Only a vast, deep, and endlessly flowing expanse of water that shone under the dreamlike radiance of the 7 beautiful suns.